ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Paravagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So continuing on with Prapanna Parijata, second chapter. Chapter 2 on the nature of property. Property is defined as the mental attitude consisting of a determination which results in prayer of supplication by a person who has a desire to attain a goal, but no means thereto. Okay, so it's a nice definition. Of course, Tengalacharya would say that mental attitude is all that's necessary for property, and that the prayer of supplication is not necessary, actually. But anyway, in Krishna Charma Sloka, the verb vraja is supposed to have a mental connotation, so it means resort to me, Sharanam Vraja. Ami Kam Sharanam Vraja. Okay, so the prayer which with sincere conviction regards that God alone as the only means for the attainment of a desire incapable of being attained by any other means is the property known as Sharanagati, seeking refuge with God. Okay, so Sharanagati is synonymous with property. Therefore, with sincere love and devotion, adopt this property, also known as Sharanagati. Okay, so several different synonyms for property are being given here. Sharanagati, and we'll see some other ones as well. Bhagavan Vishnu kindly instructed Vishwaksena. So in Sri Vaikuntham, Vishwaksena is considered the Lord's secretary or head of his army, chief amongst the hosts in Vaikuntha. So Bhagavan Vishnu kindly instructed Vishwaksena in the type of refuge known as Artha property, the surrender of the miserable, and it has 5 accessories. So we're going to be talking about different types of property, Artha property and Dripta property. So these will be explained. I am a repository of negative acts, utterly incapable and helpless, O Lord. Please be my recourse. So this is a prayer of supplication. In this case, we could take that this is the attitude of supplication which is directed towards the Lord. So is this being said by Vishwaksena? Don't know. Or is the Lord just saying to Vishwaksena, this is the prayer that you should have? Not quite sure. But anyway, this is a prayer of supplication. I'm the repository of negative acts. This is what in Krishna Charmasloka in Bhagavad Gita 1866, this is what Arjuna was worried about. He was worried about all of the massive sins that he'd accumulated since time immemorial. A soul in this world, a Bada Jiva, a conditioned soul, is eternal and has got unlimited karmic sins and karmic reactions, sins and punyas and sins and good karma and bad karma, good acts and bad acts that are attached to him. And Arjuna was worried that all of these sins, especially the sins, are too much. They're unlimited, and therefore they will stop me from attaining you by the other means that Krishna gave in the Gita, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. So this is the repository of negative acts. Utterly incapable and helpless. This goes back to the first verse here, where it says, it's very important at the end here, that the property is done by a person who has no other means to reach a goal. He simply surrenders. He has no other means to reach the goal. So sometimes we find that other forms of Vaishnavism, other sampradayas from Sri Vaishnavism, and even those persons following the northern school of Sri Vaishnavism, the Wadagalais, they'll say that there are people who are qualified to perform bhakti yoga and to attain the Lord through bhakti yoga. And even the Lord himself speaks about King Janaka becoming perfect, by karma yoga. So it seems like what Krishna is saying in the Gita is it's possible that there are persons who can attain me through karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga. So the northern acharyas, the Vadagalais, they'll say, if you are qualified to do that, then that's what you should do. But here, because here in this definition of property given in verse 1, he's saying that the person who makes this prayer of supplication or surrender, right, to reach the goal, is a person who has no other means. He has no other means to attain that goal. So if you can't do something or get the result that you want yourself by your own efforts, then you resort to property. So that's the point in given here in verse 1. However, the southern acharyas, the Tengalai acharyas, would say that actually it's an illusion to think that one that is qualified for any other path but surrender. So one actually cannot achieve the goal. So one may think, oh, by karma yoga, jnana yoga, or bhakti yoga, I can achieve the goal if I have a certain amount of qualifications. But in actual fact, the goal can never be reached without the mercy of the Lord, without the Lord acquiescing and granting the goal. So once one realizes that, one has to take that into consideration and say, no, I have to only perform property and make my prayer of supplication to the Lord. Okay, so back to verse 6. The Prapanna, or the surrenderee, the surrenderer, the person who's surrendering, right? Who, reflecting deeply upon the lot that has befallen him and the attractive qualities of Hari, and being fully conscious that God is the only means, seeks refuge with him, is released from the bonds of samsara. Okay, so this is just saying that Sharanagati or property works and that you will reach the goal, which is to be released from the bonds of samsara. Samsara is then given explanation of the word samsara is given in the footnote 15. Samsara is derived from samsri. Unfortunately, in this particular book, he hasn't given diacritics, proper diacritics, so we don't have all the diacritics for the Sanskrit. But in any case, to flow continuously, course of circuit of worldly life, hence the transmigration or cycle of births and deaths, the wheel of samsara, it's called, the birth, death, disease, and old age, and going around in many lives, which Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. He says to Arjuna, both you and I have lived many lives. The difference is that you don't remember yours because of your karma. You are forced into certain bodies, but the Supreme Lord, when he comes of his own free will. So again, in the above sentences, the property of 5 angas, 5 anga means limb. So 5 limbs is mentioned. There are also there's a verse in Lakshmi Tantra, and there's also an allusion in another verse in Arhibunya Samhita. So in the Pancharatra Agama, in these 2 Samhitas, specifically in Lakshmi Tantra, they have this Anukulya Sankalpa Pratikulya Sivarjana definition verse, which talks about six parts to property or surrender, the 6th part being surrender, and the 5 parts being the limbs of surrender. So there are also other symptoms of this property, such as nikshepa, self-resignation to the care of God, putting oneself under the care of God, nyasa or sannyasa, renunciation, tyaga, relinquishment, and Sharanagati, taking refuge. And this is coming from Lakshmi Tantra 17, chapter 17, verse 75. according to the Lakshmi Tantra, by the two limbs, that is, the resolution to act in conformity with his will, with God's will, and the relinquishing of the opposition to it, in a way, predicated the nature of the other three limbs. So these five limbs, there are these five angas, but they're based on doing everything that God wants you to do and not doing anything that he doesn't want you to do. So moreover, to these limbs, the same fruit as that of their principle, the act of property, is attributed. So if you simply do these two things, these are the essence of property, acting in conformity with the will of God and relinquishing any opposition to that. Is attributed the same fruit as that of their principle, act of property, is attributed, and their various natures are also pointed out. Conformity with the will of God is grounded in the conviction that the divine presence resides within all beings. Therefore, loving kindness to all beings is said to be this conformity. So here he's giving a more of an in-depth explanation of what it means to conform to the will of God. Conforming to the will of God also means loving kindness to all other beings and to the universe, because these are also part of God. So by this knowledge of the universal pervasiveness of him, of the Supreme Lord, who is sought after in property, and the resolution to relinquish all non-conformity with his will, refraining from injury and hurt to all beings, is meant. So this is the positive and the negative. So we were talking about these two aspects here, conforming to the will of God and giving up opposition to it. So here in 10 and 11, and 10, 11, and 12, in 10, we're talking about a further explanation of conforming to the will of God and following what he wants. And in 11 and 12, giving up, refraining from injury and hurt to all beings. So basically what it's saying is have loving kindness to the universe and to all living beings, and also that means also giving up injury and hurt to all living beings in the universe. Okay, so 13 and 14, considering that the several means of attaining of moksha, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga, are not guaranteed to succeed because they depend upon one's qualification and also one's self-effort. And there are also many pitfalls owing to the lack of perfection in practice, right? So you may be qualified, you may even attempt to do those sadhanas of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, but even in that practice, there can be a lack of perfection of the practice. You may not attain siddhi or perfection of that practice. And so there are many pitfalls owing to the lack of practice, perfection of practice, and deficiency of time, place, and circumstances. So there may be not only deficiencies in your practice, but also deficiencies from outside of the time that you're practicing it, the place that you're practicing it, or circumstances under which you're trying to practice it. And the absence of qualification to engage in some of the practices. So you may think that you're fully qualified to perform karma yoga, jnana yoga, or bhakti yoga, but in actual fact, you're not qualified for some aspects of those yogas, those sadhanas, those methods. Relinquishing arrogance. So absence of qualification to engage in some of the practices, relinquishing arrogance and dejection is what is known as karpanya. So karpanya is also one of the 5 angas spoken of in that Lakshmi Tantra verse. So karpanya means giving up the arrogance to think that you are qualified to perform these other sadhanas of self-effort, or these means of self-effort. And dejection would be thinking that the goal cannot be reached in any other way, reading the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and seeing only the paths of karma, bhakti, and jnana, as Arjuna did, and then coming to the end of it in the 18th chapter and saying to Krishna, look, you've explained all these paths, but I'm dejected because I'm still dejected. I'm still sad because I feel that I can't possibly attain the goal through these means. So give me some other means, Krishna. And Krishna gives property. He gives surrender. So stating that the other methods of achieving liberation are extremely difficult to practice is a suggestion that they should be abandoned and property should be resorted to instead by one who is incapable and unqualified. Stating that the other methods of achieving liberation are extremely difficult to practice is a suggestion that they should be abandoned. Well, this is what Krishna says, Sarvadhamam Parityaja, abandoned. Parityaja means, tyaj means to abandon. So chajati. So to abandon those other processes, and property should be resorted to instead, right? Mame kam sharanam vraja. Surrender unto me only. Instead, by one who is incapable and unqualified. So just again, the Southern Acharyas of Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas would say everybody's unqualified because ultimately it's only the Lord who makes the goal achievable. So therefore, it's not possible for somebody on his own qualifications and actions to achieve the result. So because of his easy accessibility and unwavering compassion, because of the connection to the Lord, right, and his dependent, a relationship which is not new, but has been existing ever from the beginning. So because of his easy accessibility and unwavering compassion, also because there's an eternal relationship between the Lord, Isha, and Ishatavya, his dependent, the living being, even from the beginning, meaning from time immemorial, the firm belief that he will indeed protect us. Mahavishwas means great faith that he'll protect us, who are comfortable, who are conformable to him, is what is known as Vishwas, trust, right? So in the slogan it says Mahavishwas. So great trust, destructive of all negative karma. So this great trust that the Lord will save us is what will save us from all that negative karma. After thus skillfully ascertaining the capability of the provider of refuge, right? So after thinking over these things and realizing that the Lord is the only one who has the qualification, the qualities to provide refuge and to save us, the provider of refuge to protect one, and with firm belief that God will protect one should resort to him as the way and the goal, the means and the end, like that. So even though he is merciful, capable, and the Lord of all beings, yet unsolicited, he will not protect. Therefore, one should apply oneself to supplication. Okay, so here is a difference between another difference between the Northern Acharyas and the Southern Acharyas of Sri Vaishnavism. The Northern Acharyas saying there must be a supplication, there must be a prayer by the living being to surrender to the Lord. Otherwise, the Lord won't act. Just like, and the example is given, and later on will be spoken about, somebody who's drowning has to yell out for help. Otherwise, the lifeguard will not come and save the person from drowning. So the Southern Acharya's response to that is the fact that the living beings are actually the living beings and the universe. Everything is the property of the Lord and owned by the Lord. So he will naturally save. He will naturally look after his property. Like he will naturally look after his property. And in fact, thinking that we have to ask him to look after us is somehow doubting the fact that he owns and controls us at every moment. So even though he's merciful and capable and the Lord of all beings, right, yet unsolicited he will not protect. Therefore, one should apply oneself to supplication. So here there is a doubt amongst the people who are taking refuge, the Prapannas. In this, he's saying that there may be a doubt whether the Lord will protect us if we don't pray to him for that protection, like that. But the Southern Acharyas will counter to say that if one has great faith that the Lord will protect you, then how can he have this doubt? How can he also have this doubt at the same time and therefore feel that he has to make that prayer? There's nothing wrong with praying to God for protection. At the same time, the question is being asked here whether it's necessary or not. The reason why Vedanta Deshika and the Northern Acharyas say the big point that they try to make here is if it were not necessary for the soul to do this supplication, to actually make this prayer to be saved, then everybody would be saved because nobody's making that prayer except for the Prapannas. So if everybody, then everybody would be saved. So that's their point. So to say, Lord, please protect me, is what is known as choosing one's protector. Therefore, it's important to actually invite the saving grace. Okay, that's self-explanatory. But prapatti, or surrender, is the means to receive the grace of God by one who deserves it. Oh, sorry, one who desires it, not who deserves it. Everybody deserves it, of course, right? Everybody is the property of God, and everybody therefore deserves to be saved by God. So one who desires it. Property is a means to receive the grace of God by one who desires it. Atma nikshepa, which means surrender of the soul, self-resignation to the care of God, is the relinquishing of any rights one may have to the rewards of one's actions, which results in the surrender to Keshava, God. Okay, so also the point here being that we may be afraid of the reactions to sinful activities, but what about the pious activities that we've performed? If somebody says, well, I would like to enjoy the I would like to enjoy the reactions to the pious activities, and I'd like to enjoy in heaven, and I'll go to Vaikuntha later. I'll go to God later, but let me enjoy in heaven or in bliss first, like that. So the point being that the soul, when he completely resigns himself to the care of God, he should relinquish any rights on any rewards to pious actions that he makes. So one should avoid self-exertion in both the method, upaya, the means, and the result, phala. Okay, so both of which belong to the swamyayata, right? Swamyayata, and we'll read about that in footnote 16. And it is also plain that nikshepa has accessories. Nikshepa means resignation. So one should avoid self-exertion in both the upaya and the phala, the upaya and the upaya, the means and the goal, like that. So, well, it's pretty obvious that self-exertion in both the method and the result. So this is resignation, just resigning oneself. So okay, so now we're going to talk about, now let's first of all look at footnote 16 about the Lord as swamyayata. Property is a surrendering of oneself into the protective embrace of the Lord, much like a drowning person who surrenders herself to the lifesaver, who then does the work of bringing her to the beach. Struggle is necessary while trying to stay above water. So as long as the lifesaver or the lifeguard has not got the hold of the person, is actually in the process of saving the person has to struggle to stay above the water, the drowning person. But the struggle becomes a threat to life if continued after the lifesaver has taken hold of one. So after the resignation, nikshep or property or tyag, whatever you want to call it, sharanagati, after the surrender of the soul, if the soul continues to struggle like that, then it can become a threat to life. So continuing to act in these other according to these other means, trying to act on these other means, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, after property, right, becomes a threat. It becomes actually a threat. So this is the point being made in verse 22. So now we're going to talk about different types of property. In artha property, the surrender of the desperate, all the aforementioned aspects of property combined at once. So just artha property is when somebody does artha property, they're saying, I want to immediately go to God. I don't want to live out the rest of my life in this material world. I want to immediately die and go to liberation. I cannot bear to be in this material world anymore, to be separate from God. So I have to go. Then dripta property, which is much more a normal sort of occurrence amongst Sri Vaishnavas and those who surrendered to God, is somebody who's surrendered, but then sees the Lord's plan in them living the rest of their life. So I'm surrendered to God. I want to go to God. God will save me, but let God's plan work out until the end of my life, and then I'll be with Him. But in dripta property, the surrender of the confident, they manifest themselves in succession. So this will be explained a little bit. The division of prapannas, different surrenders, right, into artha and dripta is mentioned in Srimad Ramayana. So in the Ramayana, I've given you a quote here, even an enemy who takes refuge of another, whether an artha or a dripta, ought to be protected by a well-cultured person by even giving up his own life. So this is a quote from Ramayana. One who is averse to the idea of taking another body is called dripta, confident. One who grieves, so a person who says, I'm averse to taking a birth again in this material world, continuing the cycle of samsara, birth and death, but transmigration samsara, but at least to the end of this lifetime, I'm willing to forestay my attainment of liberation or being with God. Then one who grieves even while in this body with the result of past karmas is called the artha, or the miserable. So this other person is artha prapanna, right? Artha prapanna is miserable because, so the dripta prapanna is confident that at the end of this life he'll be liberated. The artha prapanna, he is miserable in this life, and he yearns to be with God this very moment. So we'll see. Let's look at the 17 here. The dripta's present contentment arises not out of any physical happiness which he disregards, right? But out of realizing the working of God's will in everything. So it's God's will. He put me here in this body, and I'm suffering and enjoying this particular lifetime. So as long as I'm willing to accept that, as long as he wants me to accept this life, I'm willing to accept that. So a dripta is not so he's saying that then he's also saying, so a dripta is not dissatisfied with this body because it's given by God, and he's fully prepared to fulfill his temporal duties here in this world, but longs for the union with God after death. Whereas an artha's misery is not out of any physical suffering, which is nothing for him, right? Because he realizes that suffering is given also by the Lord. But he feels miserable even at a moment's separation from God, and consequently grieves at this body, which keeps him away from divine union. Okay, so that's the footnote, the explanation of the explanation of how an Artha Prapanna and how a Dripta Prapanna are feeling, like that. Property or surrender also is therefore mentioned as divided into Artha and Dripta, right? So we just talked about that. However, there ought to be the firm conviction that the way for attainment of God is He Himself. So again, here, the Southern Acharyas, the Tengalaya Acharyas of Sri Vaishnavism have taken this principle here, that the attainment of God is He Himself. He is the means and He is the goal. He's the upaya and He's the upaya. And therefore, they've taken that and they've understood that to the fullest extent and said, therefore, there's no need for supplication at all. There's no need for supplication at all. And the Prapanna should have great faith that he'll be saved either immediately or at the end of his life. That which is known as sadhya bhakti, two types of bhakti. There's sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti means the process or the means, the upaya, the way to get to liberation, to God through devotion. So sadhana, there can be karma yoga sadhana, by means of works, jnana yoga by means of knowledge, and bhakti yoga by means of devotion. And sadhya bhakti, he calls it here love as the end. Love as the end, not as the means, not devotion as a means to God, but a devotion as an end. In other words, what do we call devotion as an end? It means, we call it, another word for this is kainkarya, or service to God, loving service to God. That which is known as sadhya bhakti, love as an end, as the end, is also a form of property. So this is perhaps talks about the sadhya bhakti would be what the dripta prapanna, the person who is content to live out the rest of his life here in this material world, what he engages in. He engages in service, loving service to God, which can be known as either kainkarya more commonly or sadhya bhakti. Some other Vaishnava sampradayas will talk about sadhya bhakti. Sadhya bhakti means love as an end in itself, and not love of God as an end in itself, and not as a means to attain any goal like liberation. The anecdotes of the Bhagavata, the Srimad Bhagavatam, conveying this message are as follows. So there are stories in the Bhagavat Purana about this sadhya bhakti as a form of property. A prapanna, one who seeks refuge, is like the chataka bird. Praptavya, one who gives refuge, is like the pigeon. So there's a story about a chataka bird and a story about a pigeon in the Bhagavatam. These functions of the protected and the protector are indicated by the characteristics of these birds and their analogies. So let's have a look at the footnote here to explain about those analogies. Okay, so the chataka bird in Indian poetry is supposedly a bird that only drinks drops of rain. It won't drink water that's landed on the ground or coming from a river or a pond. It only drinks water when the water is there in the sky and drops down in the form of raindrops. So at the end of summer, the chataka bird waits patiently and desperately for the monsoon to quench its unbearable thirst. So this in the same way, the prapanna desperately waits for moksha. The prapanna, in both cases, either artha property or dripta property, the prapanna, the person who's surrendered, the surrenderer, right? The surrenderer, he waits desperately for the Lord to liberate him, for the Lord to do that. So, and the analogy is given from the Bhagavatam, just like this bird waits for the monsoon season to get the raindrops because it only drinks raindrops like that. Of course, it's an analogy, and you know, there's no bird that has to wait all year for a drink, obviously. So, so that is the Chataka bird in the Bhagavatam is compared to the Prapanna. And God, on the other hand, we've got the surrenderer and the surrenderee, the person, God, who we're surrendering to, is like the pigeon in the story in Srimad Bhagavatam. So there was a pigeon, there was a storm, and there was a hunter. And this hunter was a fowler, sometimes they say, a hunter of birds. And he had took shelter under a tree during a storm in which the pigeon was living. The pigeon took mercy, you know, had mercy for this this hunter, and thought, oh, the poor hunter, you know, he's taking shelter in the storm. So the pigeon kindled a fire to warm the hunter, so the hunter could warm himself up by the fire because he was out in the storm and he was wet and cold. And he even dropped himself, the pigeon even dropped himself into the fire to be cooked in order to appease the hunter's hunger during the stormy night. So this is also another story from the Bhagavatam. So in this analogy, the living being is the hunter, the pigeon is God, and God goes to such extraordinary lengths to offer himself to help the living beings. So that's the point. So we have these two birds, one representing the surrendered soul, and one representing the supreme mercy of the Supreme Lord. Okay, so this is from the Bhagavatam. So property is also explained elsewhere in general treaties. All those aspirants who seek to attain liberation from suffering and samsara, and those who desire to attain the supreme abode of bliss, Vaikuntha, from whence there is no return, they may strive through any of the other means, such as Jnana Yoga, path of knowledge, Karma Yoga, path of disinterested engagement, right? Not just the path of action, but the path of action where the fruits are given up of the action. And by Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. So these are all three sadhanas or methods of self-effort that are taught in the scriptures, especially in Bhagavad Gita. But the only sure path to success and to the attainment of the Supreme Being, Purushottama, is through nyasa, surrender, or property. So surrender, tyaga, nyasa, sannyasa, sharanagati, these are all synonyms for this process of surrender to the Lord. So here in verses 30 to 32, he's actually saying, actually, the only sure path is surrender. Now, the Southern Acharyas would say it's actually the only path. The other path doesn't, these other paths also depend upon surrender, ultimately. They ultimately depend upon the mercy of the Lord, and you can only get the mercy of the Lord if you surrender. So property is the means to attain the goals of worldly life, as well as the supreme goal of the Vedas, that is liberation or moksha, which are so difficult to accomplish by other methods. Right. So here he's saying that not only by property do we attain liberation, but we also can attain other goals in worldly life like that. So of course, this is not the main reason for surrendering to the Lord, but it is supposedly the idea is that one can attain all his goals, even in worldly life, by doing property as well. So it's an arguable. The synonyms for property used in this chapter are sharanagati, nikshepa, nyasa, tyaga, and sannyasa.
I was thinking about that artha property and dripta property, and I was actually thinking, well, it seems that one who is the artha prapanna is forcing the hand of God in one sense, and thereby, you would think that dripta property might be, you totally surrender to his will and whenever he desires, etc. But it seems here from this explanation, even I can't really tell, because even the Artha Prapanna, he is thinking um that actually this body is keeping me away from the service of the Lord. So I can't take it anymore. I just want the service of the Lord. What do you think? I guess it's not right.
So, okay,
Mhm.
so the service of the Lord doesn't necessarily mean one has to be in Vaikuntha or one has to be liberated to serve the Lord. One can still serve the Lord here.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever we do, we can see as service, actually.
Mm-hmm.
He's placed us in a position, and if we act in that position, it's a service to him.
Yes.
So we have these sayings in India. Sometimes people have hear these sayings, and sometimes they're Jana Seva, Janardana Seva. Service to
Mm-hmm.
man is service to God. So
Mm-hmm.
another one is Manusha Seva, Madhava Seva.
Mm-hmm.
Service to man is service to God. That also means different names, Janardana and Madhava. But anyway, Jana Seva, Janardana Seva, because of the alliteration, they put those two together. Jana Seva, Janardana Seva, Manusha Seva, Madhava Seva. Some other people also who think Shiva is God, they say Jiva Seva, Shiva Seva. Okay, so these are you hear people say make these statements in India. Service to man, but basically what they mean is service to man is service to God. Do we accept that? Yes, we do accept that, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because in Vishishtadvaita, the understanding is that the universe and the living beings are part of God.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't see others. We don't see the universe. We don't see the universe as separate from God. We don't see the other living beings as separate from God. They're not completely separate from God. Of course, we are here in this material world, and even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "Bhumir upon the lo vayu kamanu buruyevacha hankara iti me bina prakriti rasada." In 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says, "These are bina prakriti. These are my energies, which are separate. They're separated from me." They're separated in one sense, in the sense that they're material and God is spiritual. And he also says aparayamitastvanyam in the next verse. Aparayamitastvanyam prakritim vidime param jiva bhuta mahabaho, that the jiva yaridam darite. Okay, so the jiva is above them, but the jiva is also is separate. So there are some forms of philosophy, of course, like Advaita, which believes that all these three things are one. Vishisht Advaita, the philosophy of Ramanuja, is also a form of Advaita. It's a form of oneness, but it is a holistic form of oneness in the sense that we understand the body. If we see there's a body, mind, soul complex, which is all considered to be, when people talk, for example, when my friends or my acquaintances talk about me, they're talking about the body, mind, soul complex, which is me, right? So it can be seen as one thing, this amalgamation of the body, mind, and the soul. It can also be seen as separate things. The mind is separate. Obviously the body is separate from the soul, obviously. So these Bhumira Pona, the earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, ego, the gross and subtle elements are separate from the soul. But so you have the gross and subtle body, and you have the spiritual body is just the soul. So these three come together to form a complex, which can also be understood as one thing. So this is where, because of the Antayami Brahmana in the Vedas, it also explains this. Ramanuja said, yes, this is a great analogy to understand how the universe and the souls are equal to God, and at the same time, somewhat separate. They're somewhat separate. They have separate functions. They have separate qualities. They're somewhat separate, but at the same time, they're also considered to be equal part of God. Part of God. The part is not the whole. Okay. But that's what Advaita says. Advaita says the part is the whole. Every drop of ocean is equal to the ocean, like that. But we see a drop of salt water can do something, but an ocean can do other things. For example, when you have a tsunami, right? a big, huge wave that can destroy cities and kill people, kill many people. A drop of water can't do that. It doesn't have the potency of doing that. Qualitatively, there's no difference between the drop of water, salty water, and the ocean. Qualitatively, the same. Quantitatively, they're not the same. So similarly, the living beings and material nature are qualitatively equal to God, but at the same time, not in very small aspects. God is the whole, and they're the parts, like that. So a part cannot take the place of the whole, in that sense. But God pervades from inside and outside all the living beings and the universe as well. So in that sense also, God is there. So how can we then hate any living being? How can we then ravage the earth, for minerals and whatever it is like that, destroy his properties like that? Isavasya Upanishad, Isavasya Midam Sarvam, Yat Kinche Jagatam Jagate, Chena Chaktena Punjita, Madgudha Kasisudinam. That we should know that everything animate and inanimate is owned and controlled by the Lord, and therefore, whatever is destined for us to interact with, to own or to control, like that, in this material, in this life, that's fine. But we should not over endeavor for either hating or injuring or causing, taking more than is necessary, like that. So that's the point in the Isavasya first Isavasya Upanishad's first verse. So therefore we have to see everything as part of God, and therefore we have to love all living beings and not want to and the universe, and not want to injure them or hurt them in any way, like that. And in order to know what is injury and what's non-injury, we have to look at what's love and what's not love. We have to look in the scriptures, and the scriptures will give us ways to act in the conformity to his will, and ways where we're transgressing his will, and we should, as far as possible, try to follow his will. And that's the point being made. So in both cases here, both Prapannas, we can't criticize either Prapanna, the Artha Prapati or the Dripta Prapati Prapannas. So we can understand, again, the Dripta, present contentment, arises not out of any physical happiness. So we can't say the person who's surrendered and he's continuing on with life, it doesn't mean that he's doing that type of property just because he wants to enjoy the rest of his life, right? Or he feels physical happiness in his life, which he's disregarding because he wants to surrender to God. So he's really disregarding that. But out of realizing the working of God's will in everything. So his life also is according to God's will. So because he's not dissatisfied with this body, because it's given by God, right? Then he's fully prepared to fulfill his temporal duties, but longs for union with God after death. So he's saying, Lord, I'm totally surrendered to you. Whenever you want to take me, like that. Whereas the Artha is also the Artha Prapanna. He wants to immediately have union with God, or eternal loving service to God, liberation, right? Not because he's physically suffering. We can't say, there's somebody who's enjoying in this material world, so he should do Dripta Prapati, and somebody who's suffering in this material world, he should do Artha Prapati, or somebody who's suicidal, he should do Artha Prapati, and then he immediately can go to God. He'll just drop dead and immediately go to God. So no, it's not that the Artha Prapanna chooses that form of property because he's got physical suffering, which is also considered to be nothing to him. So he should understand, the understanding of a person who surrenders is not that a person who surrenders to God just like the Dripta Prapanna, the Arta Prapanna also understands that he's surrendering to God. That means surrendering to the will of God. So if the will of God is that I suffer in this world, then I should surrender to that suffering, right? If I'm surrendered, right? A person is surrendered. He's not, well, I'll surrender, but only if I enjoy. No, if you surrender, you take the good with the bad, take the bad with the good. So this person who's also surrendered, the Prapanna, Arta Prapanna, he's willing to endure physical suffering, right, in this material world, right? But he feels miserable, more miserable, even at a moment's separation from God. He feels that is the real misery, not the physical suffering. He's enduring spiritual suffering because he feels the quality of Sheshatva that he has, that he is a servant and he really wants to serve God in the best way that he can. And the best way that he can serve God is to be in Vaikuntha, where there's nothing stopping him from serving God fully, right? We get like the gopis, they curse Brahma for giving them giving them eyelids, so that, because they have to blink their eyes, they don't see Krishna for a certain time, like that. So he really feels spiritually that he wants to be with God at every moment. So consequently, he grieves for this body because that's stopping him. That's the only thing that's stopping him, which keeps him away from divine union. However, ultimately, I would say the Dripta Prapanna is, I mean, who can say? Somebody feels like that, somebody feels like the other way. But at the same time, the Dripta Prapanna's contentment to me is more surrendered. Because he's just saying, okay, if you want me to stay in this material world and suffer, fine. Like that. Yeah. When his longing becomes so great that he disregards that, then but see, the Arta Prapanna is not disregarding that for his own sake. I can't live without going to Vaikuntha. I must be liberated immediately, not for my own sake, but for God's sake. Also, if you look in I think in Mokshapati, the point is brought up that who benefits more from liberation? And it said that God actually benefits because he gets his property returned to him. He gets his property returned to him. So the returning of the soul or the going of the soul to Vaikuntha and serving the Lord eternally is more a benefit for God than it is a benefit for the soul, according to Mumukshapati. So then why wouldn't God want that to happen sooner than later? But he has a plan. So the Dripta Prapanna is willing to go along with the plan, and the Arta Prapanna isn't really willing to go along with the plan, but at the same time, it's not because he wants his liberation, it's because he wants the Lord to enjoy his service, his eternal service more perfectly, more sooner than later. That's all. So it's a very, very fine line here, because both surrenderees, both those persons who are surrenderers, both surrenderers want to serve the Lord as soon as possible, as fully as possible. The Dripta Prapanna sees that it's the Lord's plan for him to continue doing it here for some time, and the Arta Prapanna says, yeah, it's the Lord's. He sees the same thing, but he longs more for it to happen sooner. So it's a fine line, a very fine line between Dripta property but this Arta property, I think there's some examples of some Sri Vaishnavas who performed Arta property and they surrendered and they just immediately passed away and died and went to Vaikuntha like that. So it's possible that one can follow this that system, but mostly it's once again in India, especially in philosophy, but in every aspect of life and art and custom and culture. The Indians like to cut everything up and make different. They like to categorize things, yeah. So they can't just say, okay, everybody should just surrender to God in one particular way. They want to analyze everything to the nth degree, and therefore come up with these ideas, dripta property, artha property, like that, so that we can talk about them and discuss them, which is fine, like that. But in reality, we don't see a lot of people who go for artha property, right? Who want to perform artha property. And even we have Pilalokacharya in Artha Panchakam talking about Acharya Abhimana as a way. It can be practiced as a separate upaya, as a separate means to get to God. So Karma Yoga can be separate, Jnana Yoga can be separate. But most Vaishnava Sampradayas, they don't say Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga can be separate ways to God. They say those are ancillary ways that help Bhakti Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga is really the only way to get to God. And then the Sri Vaishnavas come along and they say no, and they say, look, Nyasa is there from the Upanishads. As we saw last time, we saw that there are many statements in the different shastras, including the Vedas, that talk about property. And so they say, yeah, it can be, it can be done in these ways. And so now it's just a matter of elucidating the different ways of categorizing and everything, so we don't it's not really so practical. It's just a matter of talking out all the different possibilities of how a person might think of surrender.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that's really nice to clarify that. And yeah, I do agree when you analyze it, and that it seems that Nidra Prapanna is more surrendered in one sense, because it looks like the Artha Prapanna in one sense is like forcing, but then
No,
it's a very fine line.
Somebody else can say the Artha Prapanna is more surrendered because he wants to go serve God fully immediately,
Exactly.
like that. Why does the other guy want to hang around in this material world anyway? Like that. But if we look closer, we can see, no, it's not that he wants to stay in this material world. It's not that he wants to live in this material world or enjoy this material world. It's not that the drifter doesn't want to enjoy this material world. The artha doesn't reject the pain of being in this material world, his physical suffering. Neither of those things are happening here. They're both totally surrendered to the will of the Lord. It's just that one of them feels, one of them feels more anxiety to be in that close relationship in Vaikuntha and serving eternally quicker, and for the benefit of the Lord, not for his own benefit. And the other says, okay, I can serve God here, I can serve God there. Well, it's up to him.
Yeah.
In either case, it's up to God. It's not up to the dripta or the artha when that person is liberated. So it's really academic. It's only for dripta property and artha property are in the mind of the surrenderer, they're not. It's not God's position. Now the Lord may take that into account. May say, oh, this guy he wants to be immediately liberated. Okay, I'll liberate him immediately. And this other person, he doesn't mind, working out his parabdha karma or whatever and staying here in this material world until the end of this lifetime. In any case, samsara is negated. At the end of this lifetime, that's it. That's the finish. That's the finish of everything. So both Prapannas will attain the liberation, attain the eternal loving service of the Lord Kainkarya in Vaikuntham at the end of this lifetime, in either case, right? So with Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, that's the main thing. The main thing that we need to emphasize to people is that with Karma Yoga, you're not at all you're not at all guaranteed of attaining liberation through Karma Yoga, because in the Gita, King Janaka is the only person who is spoken of as an example of that, and we don't know any other examples in the scriptures we haven't seen. Jnana Yoga, okay, maybe the Advaitins like Jnana Yoga, so they say, but what does it take? You know, Shankara says you got to take sannyas, you got to study Sanskrit, you got to study all these scriptures, I mean, it's practically impossible for most people these days. So Karma Yoga is out, Jnana Yoga is out. Even if we say a little bit of karma, a little bit of jnana as ancillaries to Bhakti Yoga, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. Yeah, I can just chant, or I can just do deity worship, or I can just, you know, whatever. Even Atmanivedanam as part of Navada Bhakti, surrender unto the Lord, right? But it's surrender for what? That type of surrender is surrender with a goal. But property is not actually surrender with a goal. It's surrender because of understanding that we are servants of the Lord. We're understanding our actual position. It's not the surrender in Bhakti Yoga is the person who's surrendering in Bhakti Yoga is thinking that he owns the soul and he's surrendering it to God.
Yeah.
The Prapanna doesn't think that. The Prapanna doesn't think I'm surrendering my soul to God, or he shouldn't think, right? Maybe some people in the beginning, they think that it's the same. Atmanivedanam and property is the same. No. If you're doing Atmanivedanam as an anga, as a limb of Bhakti Yoga, then it's part of a sadhana. It's your self-effort, which is supposed to reach the goal. That's not what's, and that's why also the Southern Acharyas will say, even this prayer of supplication, yeah, is a form of self-effort.
Because then it seems that's still kind of Atmanivedanam, even that supplication.
It's a self-effort. It's a self-effort. It's a self-effort. That, you know, I mean, the Water guys have, the Northern Acharyas, they have a good argument. They say, well, if you didn't do it, then, I mean, why isn't everybody liberated? The point is, in Krishna Charana Sloka, is mental. It's mental. It's a mental understanding that you are the property of the Lord. Sharanam Vraja, right? It shouldn't really be saying surrender to me. It should be what surrender to me means there. It means realize that you are my property.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really an active surrender. It's a passive surrender. Yeah, it's a passive surrender. It's a complete, it's just a resignation. That's why Atmanikshep is a better term. A resignation of the soul. The soul resigns and realizes that it belongs to God. Like that. Not that I say, oh, now I'm going to actively surrender my soul to you. No, because you're already surrendered. You're already the property of the Lord, right? Your original sin is thinking that you are not, that you're separate, thinking that you're not the property of the Lord and that you can surrender to him. So that there's a little bit of ego there to say that I surrender. I surrender. I surrender myself to you. Like that. You're already there. You're just recognition, mental recognition that you are the servant of God, that you're the property of God. That's real property. And so make a differentiation here that Atmanivedanam as an anga of bhakti, as a limb of bhakti, as a part of bhakti yoga, not sadhya bhakti, but bhakti yoga. Then it's part of a sadhana. It involves the self-effort of the soul to surrender to God. Property does not involve any effort whatsoever. There's no effort in property, right? And that's the thing that maybe beginners, you know, it's hard to explain to people. You got to surrender to God, but there's no effort involved in doing it. You are surrendered to God is the point. You are God's property.
That's why it seems in the process of you know, joining the sampradaya, etc., you go through the initiation and then you take the acharya, surrender to the acharya, you're thinking that you're surrendering, etc. And that's why then after then they take you out of that illusion by then teaching you the
Well,
rahasya.
well, in one sense, okay, look at it like this. The Northern Acharyas, how do they do it? They say that Panchasamskara is just approaching the Acharya. It's not surrender to God. The surrender to God comes only with Bharanyasam, only later. The property comes later. The going to, but then why in Panchasamskara? Then why introduce the Dwaya mantra? The Dwaya mantra is in the next chapter. He's going to talk about Dwaya mantra. The Dwaya mantra is the essence of property. Of course, all these mantras, Omkara, Astakshara, Dwaya, Charmasloka, all the Charmaslokas, they're all the essence of property. They're all explaining property in more or less elaborate ways. But the point is, why introduce that? Why introduce that mantra, which is considered to be equivalent to property, at Panchasamskara? You know, I can sort of understand. Okay, maybe you have Panchasamskara and get Astakshara mantra or something like that, or even Astakshara, because Astakshara doesn't, unless when you go into Mumukshapati, you understand that it means the same thing as Dwayam and as Charmasloka. But until then, it's just Om Namo Narayana, my obeisances to Lord Narayana. It doesn't really put you apart from Madhvas or from other types of Vaishnavas who also use that mantra, right? And who are not Prapannas. They may be practicing, the surrender of self-effort, Atmani Vedana, as part of their Navada Bhakti, but they're still doing Bhakti sadhana. They're still performing this path of self-effort, whereas Sri Vaishnavas are not. And it's a subtle difference, but at the same time, so what that could be there, if the Vadagalais or the Northern Acharyas, if they wanted to emphasize Sharanagati as Bharanyasa, they would give Dwaya mantra in Bharanyasa, and they would, you know what I'm saying? That's what they would do, but they don't. Somehow or other, they give Dwaya mantra in Panchasamskara itself, and so it should be understood as property. It should be understood as Sharanagati. So that Dwaya mantra it should be understood as Sharanagati, like that, because it's explicit. Surrender is implicit. It's implicit in Astakshara. It's implicit in some other mantras, but it's explicit in Dwaya mantra. It's really, really obviously. I surrender unto the 2 feet of Lakshmi and of Narayana, who's with Lakshmi.
Yeah.
You can't be more, explicit than that. It's just so plain. So that doesn't make sense from that point of view. Why you would say that, but at the same time, their point is, okay, maybe you have to take Panchasamskara, and then after Panchasamskara only, you're going to read Mumukshapati, and you're going to, that's the process. The process is you're not going to, which is very interesting, because if people read Mumukshapati first, then when they take Panchasamskara, I would say, read Mumukshapati first. But the problem is that there's this orthodox idea that you shouldn't study the meaning of a mantra before you get the mantra, right? So it's like chicken and the egg philosophy, which came first, right? So should you get the mantra first and then understand the meaning, or should you understand the meaning and then crave to get the mantra, because the mantra represents Sharanagati, represents property? I would say it's very similar to the Christians. Okay, there are some Christian sects that they don't baptize the children when they're little babies, because they say the kid doesn't know. The kid doesn't know what you're doing. He doesn't know that he's being baptized. He doesn't know that he's being saved or whatever. He doesn't understand, right? Only after they grow up and they go to Sunday school for so many years and they understand, oh, this is the meaning of being christened, or entering the church, or whatever it is, then I will take the actual steps to get christened, or to be be
Baptized, yeah.
baptized. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's some Christian denominations who say that no, they're only adult baptism. Only when you're an adult you can be baptized. I mean, you go through the same thing in the UK with your council. They say, look, no initiating of people who are underage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you're doing it for legal reasons, for some legal reasons, maybe.
Well, I
But
was
it's also philosophical reasons. There are philosophical reasons. Until you understand what initiation means, how can you get initiated? You know, I saw initiation. I was there in Vrindavan. I saw initiation. Bhavananda gave initiation to some little Gurukul kids. These kids are really small, and he's making these kids say no illicit sex. And he said to one kid after he repeated what the regular principles were, he said to one kid, "Do you know what that means?" And the kid hasn't reached puberty yet. He has no idea what sex is, right? So he's like, no. You know, how can he make that a vow? How can he do it? He doesn't understand the meaning of the vow.
exactly.
So you know, there's a good argument to be made that how can you do Pancha Samskara without understanding what property is? And how can you understand what property really is without studying Mamukshapati, without studying the Rahasya Granthas, either of Vadagalai or Tengalais, whatever it is, without understanding what you're doing? How can you then say you're doing it like that? But ultimately, remember, you're not doing anything. So it doesn't really matter if you understand it or not, because you're still the property of the Lord, always.
Yeah.
So from a Tengalai point of view, it doesn't really matter. That it doesn't really matter that people take Pancha Samskara, right? And they don't really understand property to that level, in that detail. If they just told, now you're going to surrender to God. So, you know, you go there and you do your Pancha Samskara, and when you're doing it, you feel like, oh, this is my surrender to God. I'm surrendering to God. But you're not actually actively surrendering to God. You're already God's property.
Yeah.
It's only a recognition.
Yes.
And the day before the ceremony, you also recognize that. So what's the difference? So you're just going through the motions, but it's not anything special. You know, it's that you're doing. Really.
Mm-hmm. It's just interesting also that Vedanta Deshika, if it is he that called it that, about saying Bharanyasam, you know, putting the
Yeah.
burden of your
Yeah.
sin.
Well, it'd be interesting to go through. We could go through Rahasya Triyasaram and see what he says like that. So I'm not against. I've read Rahasya Triyasaram. I have it in English, a very good copy in English, and I've been through it. You know, and most of it is the same. It's the same as the you know, Rahasya Granthas of Pilalokacharya and Manavala Muni. Most of it's the same. But
Yeah.
but some interesting points are there. Just like that article about that Patricia Mummy made of the Charmasloka, like that. She made some points that Vedanta Deshika is making this Vedantic argument, and the Southern Acharyas are making their other argument, different argument. So, I mean, you have to also see it from that point of view, that some people are preaching in-house amongst in the Sri Vaishnava community. Really, people don't care too much if it stands up to all the Vedantic scrutiny. But Vedanta Deshika he wanted it to stand up to Vedantic scrutiny, because he had to preach in Kanchipuram and to people who are Advaitins or whatever. Not that Tengalais don't preach to Advaitins too. We have, you know, Parasar Bhatta, who defeated this guy Vedanti, who became Nanjir. So, you know, it's not that Tengalais can't defeat Advaitins also, you know. But in any case, most of this stuff is very, very, these are minutiae. These are small things, you know, and they're not broad strokes about property and everything like that. So broadly speaking, we say to people, yes, you should surrender to God. You know, but what we really should be saying to people is, yes, you should realize that you're already God's property.
Exactly. Vraja.
That's it.
That's a mental thing. Yeah, because that's what I'm saying, that even at Bharanyasam, it seems that not to be critical at all, but it seems that again, it's saying you have to put your sins on the Lord. But already Charma Shloka deals with that. You know, you do the first part, relinquish everything, and then Mami come. And that's it. You don't have to worry about the other part.
Yeah, but maybe you know, that's the thing that I found with my Wadagalai friends, is that they're not relinquishing everything. They're not really relinquishing everything. They say, "Oh yeah, I've got to, got to go to school, and I've got to get my job, and I've got to do my, I've got to have kids, and I've got to raise my kids, and I've got to get them married, and then I'll think about property, then I'll think about Bharanyasa."
They seem to okay, after the initiation and whatever, okay, I'm gonna just rake up the sins now and
Yeah, no big
make the
rush.
bara.
No big rush. Once we get to Bharanyasa, then we have to stop sinning.
Yeah.
Like that. So then what happens is that people on their deathbed, basically, it's like in the Catholic Church where they give you absolution on your deathbed,
Exactly.
So that, I don't think that's that is not either what Ramanuja or any either Vedanta Deshika or the Southern Acharyas have taught. They haven't taught that. They haven't taught that let's leave. Look at Vedanta Deshika's life. He led an exceptional life.
Yes.
He didn't say, okay, well, I got to go get a job and raise my kids, and once they're married, then I can retire, and then I'll surrender to the Lord. He didn't do that. He was always surrendered. So so it's one thing to preach something or to teach something, and it's another thing to look at the lives of the acharyas and lives of all the people in all the lineages and see how they lived. And it just seems like not the right way to. I mean, you're talking so much about heavy philosophy about property and all this sort of stuff like that, and then you say to the person, well, you have your Upanayana, then go have Panchasamskara, and that means you're approaching the guru, and then then go do whatever you like, and basically with the rest of your life, and realizing that you're a part of the whatever mat, and you're the disciple of the guru or something like that. And then when you get really, really tired of material life, and you've finished up all your business and all your kids are married and everything like that, then come back and we'll do this thing called Bharanyasa, where we're not giving you any mantras or anything. We're not teaching you anything new, but we're just asking you to stop eating outside, worshiping, going to other temples, going to temples of devatas, and criticizing Vaishnavas, right? So until then, right, until you're like ready to retire, you can go ahead and just continue doing all that stuff.
Om Namo Narayana.